If you're hiring someone to fix your website, you're really hiring them to shape your messaging and the page hierarchy. That's a strategy role, not a rewrite task. And the tricky part is that it's surprisingly easy to sound competent in this space without having a repeatable process, especially when you're on a sales call. So before we get into answering how to choose the right person to fix your site, I want to do a quick triage because my website needs fixing can mean a few different things. If your site's broken, it's slow, it's buggy, that's typically dev help first. If you're getting almost no traffic, you may have a visibility problem first. And if you're getting traffic, but the inquiries are weak, maybe they're low quality or they're inconsistent, that can be a messaging, page strategy, or user experience problem. This video is about that last category, how to vet the person responsible for your messaging and page decisions. Often it's a copywriter, conversion strategist. So you're hiring a high quality person suited to your needs. Here's what's coming up. I'm going to give you 7 questions you can ask any copywriter. These questions are designed to reveal how they diagnose, how they prioritize, how they handle proof, and how they make trade-offs. Then I'll give you 5 quick deal breakers that should end the call because they usually predict scope creep, loads of revisions, and a site that's new but not necessarily fixed. Before we jump into the 7 questions, I want to be clear that I'm not just going to hand you a list and send you on your way because too often people don't know what a good engagement should look like. So they can't tell whether they're being led through a responsible process or just being sold deliverables. A solid website messaging engagement usually has 5 parts. First one's diagnosis, what's actually wrong and what matters most. Second one's a decision framework, what goes where and why. Third is execution, where copy and page structure. Fourth is guardrails, scope control and clear revision rules. And the last is measurement and iteration, what working looks like and what happens after the launch. So we're going to go through the 7 questions and you're going to notice each one maps back to one of these steps. The first question you want to ask the copywriter you're thinking about, walk me through how you figure out what to say on a page before you start writing. What you're trying to uncover here is simple. Do they have a repeatable thinking process or are they just winging it? So you want to listen for whether they can clearly name things they're trying to identify before writing, like who the target buyer is, what triggers the decision to reach out, what objections or doubts are most likely, what proof is missing or unclear, what might be creating friction around the next step, and what the page's job actually is. Then listen for where they get inputs. A thoughtful answer usually includes some mix of sales calls or intake notes, reviews and testimonials, common questions your customers ask, competitor scanning, and maybe might include even basic site data like search console or analytics or heat maps. And the key part is they should be able to explain how these inputs turn into decisions. For example, what belongs in the hero sections, what gets moved down lower, what gets totally cut out. So beware of an answer that sounds like, I just interview and write from that. That isn't automatically wrong, but if there's no decision framework behind it, you are relying on wordsmithing instead of wordsmithing with strategy. Question 2 to ask your copywriter. When you're writing for a service business like mine, what usually stops a ready buyer from contacting us? And how do you remove those barriers on the page? This question is about whether they understand buyer skepticism because bad leads are often due to buyers feeling uncertain. So listen for whether they can name specific blockers and then connect those blockers to specific fixes. Some common blockers an experienced conversion copywriter might identify in buyer uncertainty are buyers aren't sure if what you offer can help them, or they don't see enough evidence that they can trust you. They've tried things in the past but haven't gotten results. They're worried about trying something new, or they're comparing you against other options. And then the copywriter might tell you how they'd remove those barriers with things like more specificity, who it's for, what you do, what you don't do, maybe strategic proof that are placed at moments of highest friction. It could be clear processes and expectations, or risk reversal where it's appropriate. Now, you want to watch out for generic answers like "we'll make it compelling" or "we'll make it sound more premium" without naming what the buyer is actually worried about. A useful way to think about this is a good page doesn't just persuade, it actually reassures the buyer. Question 3 to ask your copywriter is, how do you decide what not to include? What gets cut, shortened, or completely moved off the main page? This is the question that tells you whether you're hiring someone who can create clarity through editing and hierarchy, not just writing. Because most service business websites don't suffer from a lack of information. They suffer from a lack of prioritization. So listen whether they talk about the page as a decision path. A strong answer usually sounds like some version of, "We prioritize decision-making information over nice to know," or "We reduce cognitive load by making the page scannable." "We put the highest friction questions earlier and we move supporting detail lower or completely off the page." And listen for comfort with saying no from the copywriter. Not in a combative way, just in a focused way. Because part of the copywriter's job is being able to say, "This detail's interesting, but it's not helping the buyer decide." Watch out for a more is more mindset, like adding explanations, adding sections, or more words. That's the difference between a writer and a strategist. One adds, but the other prioritizes. Question 4 to ask your copywriter is, if we disagree on something, like I want a big emotional headline, but you think we need proof first, how do you resolve that? This question is about what happens when you hit the moment that always shows up in these projects. You have an opinion, they have an opinion, and the page has limited space and limited attention. What you're trying to uncover is whether they have a decision method that keeps you out of endless opinion loops. A strong answer usually includes some version of, "We tie the decision back to the job of the page and the questions the buyer needs answered." It's also a good sign if they're comfortable saying, "Sometimes we can test later, but we still need to make the best call we can make now based on what we know." But you really do want to watch out for either extreme, where you might hear, "You're the client, you decide," or the opposite, "Because I said so." What you want is a person who can disagree calmly, explain trade-offs, and help you land on a choice that serves the buyer. Question 5 to ask your copywriter is, what inputs do you need from me, and what will you do if I don't have them? This question protects you from 2 common failure modes: a process that assumes you have unlimited time, perfect documentation, and neatly organized proof process, which usually means they're not gathering enough information to make good decisions. A solid answer starts with a minimum viable input list. It's not a homework assignment that takes you 2 weekends to do. It's something more along the lines of, "Here are the few things I need to do good work, and here's how we'll get them efficiently." Look for essentials like your top services, the kinds of jobs you do most often, common objections and questions that buyers ask before they commit, your service area, who you don't serve, what a good lead looks like and what a bad lead looks like, any proof assets you already have. And then you want to listen for the second half of the answer, contingency plans. A pro should be able to calmly say, "If you don't have case studies, we can pull credible claims from reviews." Or, "If you don't have time for long questionnaires, I'll use short prompts like voice notes, quick forms, or a short call focused on decisions." Or, "If you have sales emails or intake messages, those are gold." Watch out for either extreme though. A massive homework list that puts all the strategy on you, or they don't need anything from you. The point isn't to make you work harder, it's to make sure the work doesn't become subjective and doesn't stall. Question 6 to ask your copywriter is, how do you handle proof like testimonials, case studies, numbers, when a business has some proof, but it's scattered or it's weak? This is where you find out whether someone knows how to make a service business feel believable without asking you to exaggerate. A strong answer usually starts with something like a proof inventory. In other words, what proof exists, what it supports, and where the gaps are. Listen for whether they talk about building a credibility ladder, multiple forms of proof that work together instead of relying on one thing. For example, mining Google reviews for specific outcomes and language that the customers already use, or turning vague testimonials into specifics. Using concrete how we work standards could be another one. Credentials, licenses, association photos, before, after, a process steps, anything that makes the business feel real and viable. It's also a very good sign if they say something like, if we can't substantiate it, we don't claim it. Because you're not trying to sound impressive, you're really trying to sound reliable. So watch out for pressure to inflate results or make claims that you can't back up, or lean on fluffy language as a substitute for proof. What you want is someone who can take "we're good" and translate it into specific grounded credibility without crossing ethical lines. The seventh question you want to ask your copywriter is, at the end of this project, how will we know the copy is doing its job, and what happens if it isn't? This question reveals whether they think in outcomes and iteration, or whether they treat the copy like a one and done document. A grounded answer usually includes leading indicators rather than grand promises. So you want to listen for whether they can name things like higher quality inquiries, more of the right calls or form fills from the pages that matter, better click through from key pages to the contact step, or clear signals in what leads say on calls or in forms. Then listen for how they handle measurement in the real world. A pro won't pretend tracking is perfect. They usually talk about triangulating, like Search Console for query or page patterns, actions and calls from your Google business profile, if that's relevant, and basic form or call tracking where possible, and qualitative feedback. What are leads saying? What is your team hearing? And finally, listen for a post-launch plan. Something like monitoring window, a small refinement pass based on what you learn, and clear boundaries. What's included versus what becomes a new scope. You want to watch out for either of these, where they guarantee results or promises like this is going to double your lead, or total disinterest in what happens after delivery. You're looking for someone who can essentially say, we'll define what success looks like, we'll launch, we'll learn, and we'll make targeted adjustments, but without turning it into an endless rewrite. If you remember nothing else, here are 5 quick deal breakers at the end of that call. First one, they jump straight to writing before diagnosing the real problem. Why does this matter? If they start with execution and you're paying for words when what you really need are decisions like positioning, page priorities, proof, and friction removal. A quick disqualifier line is if they can't tell you what they need to understand before writing, then they're really guessing. Red flag 2 is they can't explain trade-offs or make hard calls, and everything is "it depends." Why does this matter? Website copy is mostly prioritization under constraints, under the constraint of attention, time, and screen space. A quick disqualifier line is if they can't say what gets cut or what goes in the hero and why, they are not going to protect clarity. Red flag 3 is they over-index on cleverness, personality, or brand voice before trust and proof. Why does this matter? Most established service buyers aren't persuaded by cute. They're persuaded by certainty. You can handle my problem, you're legitimate, and this isn't going to be a headache. So a quick disqualifier line is if proof and process clarity aren't central, you'll get pretty copy that doesn't convert. Red flag 4 is they avoid measurement entirely, or they promise outcomes that they can't control. Why does this matter? You want someone grounded. They know what can be tracked, what can't, and what good looks like with imperfect data. So a quick disqualifier line, if they're making guarantees or they're allergic to metrics, they're not operating like a professional. The 5th red flag is they won't qualify you. They're just taking anyone who has a pulse. Why does this matter? If they don't screen, they'll also write generic because they're not tailoring to a specific buyer and a specific decision context. So a quick disqualifier line is if you feel sold to instead of diagnosed, then run. Because if the person can't diagnose, can't prioritize, can't build credibility fast, and can't set scope guardrails, you are not hiring a strategist. You're hiring a writer to rearrange words. If you want help figuring out whether you need messaging and page strategy and support, or whether your issues actually have visibility or technical, reach out. I'll put my link to my calendar in the description and you can book a time and we'll see if we are fit.